On today's special crossover edition of Locked on Red Wings and Locked on Wild, Detroit feels a lot like Minnesota did last year, right?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Red Wings, your daily podcast covering the Detroit Red Wings and the Minnesota Wild. We are part of the Locked on Podcast Network, and we are your team every day. And we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on any great content from both shows. On today's episode, Scotty Bentley is joining me here to take a look at the Detroit Red Wings, who, in my estimation, feel a lot like Minnesota did last year. Hideous start, new coach, and all the problems seem, well, other than special teams, seem to be fixed. So we'll talk about it. We'll talk about Cam Talbot, who is old friend, making his mark on the Red Wings goalie situation this year, and we'll look forward to the games as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild, and as mentioned, joined by Scotty Bentley of Locked on Red Wings. Scotty, what's going on?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. Brian's lame and isn't here, so we can all make fun of him and say really anything we want about him. He's super bald. That's funny. Like, we can just kind of go off and talk about him however we want. So that's kind of cool. He'll love me saying that. But no, it's good, man. We're obviously having a lot of fun with Four Nations. Don't want to hear the phrase NHL All-Star Game ever again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Will be our Thursday episode. I think yours too. So I'm looking forward to Thursday night's game.
Yeah, it's going to be electric, and we'll see if Team USA can survive the injury wave.
Yes,
and take Canada down for the second time. But just a quick aside before we start talking about the Red Wings a little bit. How about Dylan Larkin taking over in the game against Canada?
So the most ridiculous part was the fact that he got as disrespected as he did. And I understand, like, I'm the Red Wings guy, like, bias, whatever, haha. But like the fact that in game one, he was their fourth line winger that was being rotated with another player. Like, he wasn't even he had the second fewest amount of minutes in the game in USA's first game. Then in game two, he's the 3 center. He's the 3C. And he's playing penalty kill, and he's out there for the 6-on-5. Like, he had a ton of minutes, and obviously, the goal and whatnot. But like, just so painfully obvious that he was not the worst player on the roster, and he was treated that way in the first game. So yeah, if anybody's going to benefit from potential injuries to top players, it's probably going to be him. So we'll see what that looks like.
And on the Minnesota Wild side, Matt Boldy, Brock Faber, they're doing their thing. So we're happy with what we've seen from the hometown players here for sure. I got to start because, as I teased at the open of the show, this Detroit season feels very last year Minnesota to me. Obviously, a rough start for the Red Wings. They make the change. They make the coaching change. Todd McClellan comes in, and the team is just scorching hot and has put themselves in position for one of those wild card spots in the East. So I got to ask, and I know much like with John Hynes coming in for the Wild last year, you're not going to make massive changes. It's too hard to make those types of changes in season. But what has been the secret sauce for Todd McClellan since he took over to get this Red Wings team back on track?
Yeah, I think that kind of is the $1 million question, because the roster is obviously the same. It was a mid-season change, but one of the things that Brian and I noticed immediately after the signing was, the Wings made a coaching change mid-season, and it wasn't like, here's an interim to replace. It was, and it wasn't even like McClellan's going to come in and just coach the rest of the year. He got a multi-year deal mid-season. Like, that is so kind of few and far between in really sports. But the NHL as well. And so I think honestly, it was a combination of a few things, but I think McClellan's mindset is aggressively simple. Like it really simplifies the game a lot more. And I think that a little bit more aggressive approach, especially offensively, has done wonders for this team. They really got in the habit of like, we want to play like a low event, possession and defense style under the previous regime, and they just didn't have the personnel to do it, and they didn't have the ability to do it, and they never did it in Newsy's entire tenure with the Wings. At no point were they a good defensive, high possession team. That they were always low possession and always really poor defensively. So I think that honestly, it's just kind of like good offense fixes all, and he's allowing the team to be a lot more aggressive in the offensive zone and, in transition on the forecheck, etc. So I think that that's probably the biggest thing, but obviously the shuffling up the lineups a little bit, stuff like that. And yeah, you mentioned special teams there has been interesting to say the least, but I really do think that that's probably the biggest part of it.
Well, and I think a lot of times it takes something like that to just kind of jolt the players into like,
new coach bump is real.
Yeah, we got to pick it up. So there's definitely something tangible about that too. I want to ask about Cam Talbot, because obviously he's a former Minnesota Wild goalie and playing pretty good so far for Detroit. So how has he been kind of stabilizing that net position for the Red Wings so far this year?
Yeah, it's funny. So Brian and I just finished our like mid-season player grades episode we do during the All-Star break every year. And Talbot, the debate wasn't, whether to put him in like a passing grade or like just above. It was, are we going to put him in the highest tier we have on here or the second highest? And that was where the debate lied, because he has been so above and beyond expectations. This guy is pushing 40, and last season had a solid year, but with a much better defense in front of him than what the Red Wings are providing him. And he has been fantastic. The numbers have come, I guess, a little bit back down to earth lately, but like before the calendar year turned, especially, he was legitimately one of the better goalies in hockey. And like the only reason that we even won any games in those first 2 months when the team was terrible were because he was on his head. So yeah, like this was a goalie room that going into the year was a huge question mark for this team. And it's been stabilized and even viewed as a strength of the Wings now. And that is almost entirely due to Cam Talbot's production. He has been phenomenal.
It wouldn't be a proper Minnesota Wild Detroit Red Wings crossover if it didn't ask about longtime Wild nemesis Patrick Kane, who just...
you're preaching to the choir there. Red Wings nemesis in a very big way as well, for sure.
Now he missed a couple of weeks at the end of January, and if I have it correct, is kind of working his way back in. Yeah. Is he getting close to what Patty Kane is at this point? He's obviously not the same player he was, but he's shown that he still is a pretty solid goal scorer and a nice kind of complementary offensive piece for this Red Wings roster.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think we have to take him for what he is at this point in his career, and you can't compare him to like prime Patrick Kane, obviously, but like this is we could go through the whole roster and I would just tell you it would be a copy and pasted conversation of like, oh, they were really bad early and then turned it around. Like that's just what happened to pretty much everybody. But he was, Brian and I had a conversation about like, what do you do with him in late November, early December, because he was producing nothing and the coaching change happened. And he was one of the biggest beneficiaries of that because the deployment is just very, cushioned. It's very catered around his current abilities. He's going to get opportunities in the offensive zone and he's going to be out there on power play 1. And he's probably going to get you almost a point a night. And since the McClellan switch happened, he's been like dang near a point a game player, which is wild at this point in his career. And he's going to be terrible defensively. And you don't want him in transition or in the defensive zone ever. But as long as you can keep him on the offensive side of the ice and on the power play, he's going to produce. And that's pretty much what he is. So yes, you're right. He missed a little bit, has kind of been gradually coming back, fourth line, then third line. And hopefully after this 2-week break, he'll be back in the top 6.
Well, we'll hope that he doesn't light the Wild up in this matchup, or at least I will. But time will tell. We'll flip things, and I'll let Scotty ask me a few questions about the Minnesota Wild, because obviously everybody is just trying to figure out how the Wild are doing this at this point, including me, without Kirill Kaprizov in the lineup. So I'm sure we'll talk about that and plenty more as we continue our special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Red Wings after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to keep you feeling fuller longer. Honestly, my favorite part, everybody likes to just sit in front of the TV and crack open pistachios the old-fashioned way. But the fact that they have no shell options is just too good to be true. And it just makes it so you can just pour a bowl and just watch your favorite show. And next thing you know, you just have housed an entire bag of Wonderful Pistachios like it's nothing. You can get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. That's wonderfulpistachios.com. Get cracking today. Welcome back to today's special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Red Wings. Again, both shows are part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. And we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. All right, Scotty, I'm going to kick back and whatever questions you have that are Minnesota Wild related, I'm an open book.
Yeah, well, I do want to start. That was my first question I have written down here with what you teased before the break. So I do want to start with the, Kaprizov goes down. Obviously, before that, the production was through the roof. I think he was pushing 2 points a game at one point earlier in the season. Tell me about, obviously, the initial reaction after he goes down, but then the ability for, you guys are still third in the Central, no? How have you been able to maintain that standing in the standings, and kind of what is the future outlook of this team without him?
It's a great question, because you should never have a situation where you have a Hart Trophy. At that point, he was one of the favorites to win the Hart Trophy with his production. And then all of a sudden you take him out of the lineup. And I remember just being kind of concerned right after Christmas when the team said, yeah, he's a little banged up. We're just going to hold him out for maybe a game or two just to give him a chance to rest. And then next thing you know, it's like 12 games and you're like, did he get traded in the dark of night and we just never heard about it? Like, what happened? And then they announced that he's going to have surgery. It's a lower body injury. It has not officially been designated, but it's pretty widely speculated that it's a groin injury for Kaprizov. He tried to play through it, just it didn't work. So had the surgery. The Wild want him to get to 100% for the end of the season into the playoffs. There's no concern about any sort of is this going to linger or anything? Like, the surgery is going to clean it up, and that should be hopefully the last he has to deal with it, at least this season. And then the team goes and they win 5 out of 6 without him in the lineup. Naturally. And it just so much of what this team has done this year makes no sense. They're one of the best teams in the league on the road. They are one of the worst teams amongst contenders, there are teams obviously that have worse records that are doing worse at home. But amongst contenders, they're one of the worst records at home of any contending team. It makes no sense. They have a style, I think, that just is so conducive to road play that we're starting to wonder if they should just wear the white jerseys at home just to just to kind of psych yourself out and, hey, this is a road game and we need to treat it as such. But it's a team that's been built on an incredibly solid top six defensemen. The 3D pairs that the Wilds throw at you have been sensational all season long. The goaltending has been rock solid too. Filip Gustavsson has had some rocky starts here lately. And I think part of that is him, but I think it also is part of just the number of injuries that this Wild team has had to navigate. But you look up, like you said, they're still in third place, and they have been playing slightly below 500 hockey for almost 2 months, and they have barely dropped in the standings because they just were so good at the beginning of the season. 17-4-4, I think, through the first 25 games of the year, which is crazy. And so they built up enough equity to be able to just focus on getting players fully healthy before they come back to make an impact. And you lose a guy who can score 1 million goals. The notion is, well, we're just going to stop the other team from scoring. And they've had some games this year. The Carolina Hurricanes on the road is one that comes to mind right before the break, where they beat the Hurricanes 4-0. And it's a Hurricanes team that averages in the 30s for shots. They finished with 21. So they just they suffocate you offensively. And that's just much like the USA did to Canada. No roads through to the goalie. And they've won a ton of games doing just that.
I want to take a trip with you. Get in a time machine with me, okay? We're gonna go back to the year 2021, and there's a lot going on in the world, right? COVID's still a thing. Crazy times 2021 was. Perhaps none crazier, obviously I say that facetiously, than the 2021 NHL draft, where the Detroit Red Wings trade up in the first round to take a goalie. And we all go, oh, well, they're going to take Wallstedt here for sure, right? And they didn't. And they took Sebastian Cossa. And now Wallstedt he's played a couple of games for you this year, yeah?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the Jesper Wallstedt. Just give me an update. I'm just curious, because that was when it was still Nolan Bianchi and myself hosting this show, and we had Wallstedt on Locked On Red Wings. That episode still exists. You can go watch Jesper Wallstedt as a guest pre-draft to Locked On Red Wings, and he said, if the Wings draft me, I will let you guys be the first media that I talk to after the draft. And we were like, sick. And then we trade up and take a different goalie that's not Jesper Wallstedt while he is still on the board. So we love Sebastian Cossa now. It was a really funny thing to look at in hindsight. I would not, I don't know, the intricacies of would you reverse it? I don't we'll see how both their careers play out. They're pretty even into Kossa's played a couple of games now for the Wings. They're pretty similar in trajectory, I think. Kossa's fantastic, and we all love him here, and we think he's going to be awesome, and he's the goalie of the future. But I am curious, those two will forever be linked in Red Wings fans' heads. Forever. Their whole careers, they're going to be compared. Just give me an update on kind of how Wallstedt's doing.
Well, it's interesting because you look at the numbers for Jesper this year, and they're not great. It's not a great Iowa team that plays in front of him.
Yeah. And
he has battled some injuries. He got a couple of games for the Wild this year when Filip Gustavsson was out and Marc-Andre Fleury was ill. So he has played a little bit. It's at the beginning of the year, Bill Guerin was adamant that the Wild were going to have a 3 goalie rotation, that we're going to have all 3 guys on the roster. And I think a lot of what we've seen with Jesper this year has just been a byproduct of how good Marc-Andre Fleury has been as a backup.
Sure.
And Fleury has been to the point that there really aren't worries about him, breaking down. He's not starting a ton of games, but he's still effective as a goalie. So it led to Jesper kind of being promised a role that didn't exist. And so then he goes down to Iowa. Obviously, I'm sure he was upset about that. Having the team say, get an apartment, you're going to be on the NHL roster. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoops, not quite. So he's just kind of, he's dealing with that. He's working his way back from that. I do like that John Hynes was pretty vocal in saying, I don't care about Jesper's results at this point this year. I want to see him just kind of make his way back from some adversity. Like if you have a bad start, what do you do between that start and your next start to put yourself in position to have a good start? So he's just waiting in the wings. He signed a deal, a 2-year deal that starts next year that is a one-way contract. So he will be on the NHL roster next year with Philip Gustafsson, and will get an opportunity to get his feet more than wet at the NHL level. I still think the world of the kid. I still have very high expectations that he'll be not just a starter at the NHL level, but like a top level NHL starter. I look a lot at what Andrei Vasilevsky did. He bounced between the AHL and the NHL at the early part of his career, and look at how he's turned out. So it's just, it's a good exercise in patience that just because a player may not stack good seasons. Young. Yeah.
Goalies are weird. Like
they're very weird. Goalies are just a completely different breed. And so I just kind of want him to get healthy. And, if he puts together like a really good 10 to 12 start run between now and the end of the season, that's going to be enough for me. His development will really get kickstarted next season at the NHL level.
Yeah. I think we're kind of feeling similarly about Cossa. Kossa's been fantastic down in Grand Rapids in the AHL. So I mean, he's been really the last, like dating back to like middle of last season. He's really kind of shown that he's, the best goalie down there. So yeah, it's interesting because like Alex Lyon and Cam Talbot have both been great so far, but neither of them are long-term options. Both are in their 30s. Obviously, Talbot late 30s, and Talbot is under contract next year. Lyon, I believe, is a free agent after this season, and given how well he's played for the Wings over the last year and a half, I'd imagine he'll have a market. So I think the plan is kind of to, Cossa might be a Cossa Talbot net for the Wings next year, which people are really excited about. And they're both still so young. We'll see how all of that plays out. But that's interesting. The as he put it, the adversity is interesting because Kossa's been roadblocked by people in front of him, but there was never nobody was ever like, oh, like Kossa's gonna be here next week, like he's gonna play. Like it was known that he was blocked for at least this season, most likely still. So like I said, they'll be compared forever here at least.
And I think if the Wilds didn't go to the length of stating it was going to be a 3 goalie rotation, if they just simply said, we expect that we'll see Jesper this year at some point, and you leave it open-ended like that, I don't think anybody reacts the way that they did. But you say 3 goalie rotation, that implies you're going to carry 3 goalies.
3 goalie rotation, yeah.
Like there's no way to there's no way to twist that.
Right.
So we'll see, but it does lead us to the matchup between these two teams, and it is a home and home. We'll talk about the home and homes as we finish the show, as well as some players that could stand out, much like Dylan Larkin, Matt Boldy, Brock Faber, and others have in the Four Nations Face-Off. We'll discuss all that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Red Wings after this. One final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Red Wings. Once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day as well. Scotty, let's dive into something that neither of us want to talk about, but we should because it's a pretty glaring issue for both teams. I was looking through the league statistics here to get ready for our episode, and I find the Minnesota Wild at 29th in the league on the penalty kill, 71.6%. I find the Detroit Red Wings at 32nd, and they are at 69.7. But as we were discussing before we hit record, you said it was actually worse than that at some point this season?
Hilariously, yes. That's actually an improvement. They were... I mean, I'm not kidding. When it was still Lalonde, I mean, they were on pace to be one of the worst penalty kills in like recent memory. And now, while they haven't been good, far from it, they are not like, wow, this is one of the worst penalty kills I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, it's an uphill battle. It's also tough to like dig yourself out of that type of like hole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like once you're one of the worst in the league, you got to play really well for a long time to kind of level the water there. So yeah, I think since McClellan took over, Brian looked it up the other day. They're like in the mid 20s in penalty kill. So like they're still not good, but like, you know, they're not sub 70% bad either. Like a lot of things, it's just hard to compare this team over like a full set of stats covering the whole year because it really is a tale of two completely different teams.
Yeah, and as I've talked penalty kill enough to have really gone too far down the rabbit hole this season. It's one of those things where you can be like 90% of the way there on a 2-minute penalty, and you still give up a goal, and it's still judged as a bad penalty kill.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one of the wildest things about the Red Wings special teams is like the penalty kill is awful. The power play is maybe the best power play in hockey. So like you're giving up a goal pretty much every game off of special teams, but you're also almost at like a 30% clip of your power play and are well over 30% since McClellan took over. Like that was the one thing that even when Lalonde was here, they were still like 8th or 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere around there with their power play. And then, yeah, since McClellan's taken over, they've legitimately been the best power play in hockey. So, like, it's a glass cannon.
It is just the weirdest thing. And to take it to another level with the Minnesota Wild, again, home and road splits have been just bizarre for this team this year. And the Wild's penalty kill on the road is in the 80s, in the 80%, which tells you that then at home it's hideous. I don't get it. I don't understand, but it's nice this year, I guess, for the Wild that they haven't taken penalties at the level that they have in previous seasons, where you're like, well, yeah, you're a bottom 5 penalty kill. Maybe don't be a top 2 team in terms of penalties taken. They've cut that down, but it's the demon is always there under the bed, no matter if you get a new bed, if you move to a new house, if you change the sheets, it's still there and it's still lurking and just ready to ruin your day.
Yeah, well, and that's the one silver lining with the Wings penalty kill is that they don't get penalized. They are one of the least penalized teams in the, I think, top 3 in fewest penalty minutes on the season. So that's been a huge thing for them. One of the biggest thing when comparing and contrasting these two teams, I mean, you mentioned there the penalty kill is relatively similar. Obviously, the power play is much different, but like the 5-on-5, you know, goals for, goals against, just like super basic stuff like that. They're kind of in the same ballpark. The one glaring difference for the Wings' power play and for the Wild is just in net. I mean, I know we've talked about it a little bit earlier, but we've talked about it a lot actually already this episode, I'm realizing, but the goalie situation. It's not just one person. The goalie room as a whole for the Wild has been phenomenal this season.
Yeah, it's been, whether it's been Philip Gustafson or Marc-Andre Fleury, they both have had no issues being able to hold opposing teams down, and that takes pressure off of guys offensively when you know that, because that was one of the big things that just led to the season that the Wild had last year. Was it seemed like every game they were giving up the first goal, and you're saying, okay, are we going to make it 10 minutes without giving up a goal?
Right.
Are we going to make it 6 minutes? Like, it's just every game you were just waiting for the opponent to score the first goal. And now the Wilds are one of the best teams at doing that this year. So they've done a nice job of flipping that script, as many scripts have been flipped this year. But it always comes down to, just for the Wilds, can the top guys, without Kirill Kaprizov, can they get the scoring done? Can your top six handle the scoring?
Sure.
Especially against an opponent like Detroit, because you look at some of those names on the list for the Red Wings this year, and obviously we talked about Patrick Kane, we talked a little bit about Dylan Larkin, but you got Alex DeBrincat, you've got Lucas Raymond, guys that are very capable of putting the puck in the back of the net. And if the Wilds don't get contributions from those top guys, that they have tended to struggle to score in other situations.
Yeah, and I think that's another similarity with these two teams. It hasn't really bitten the Red Wings since McClellan took over, because they've had two different 7-game winning streaks just since he took over in the middle of December. So like they are on fire in the best possible way for sure. But a lot of the offense does rely on the top six for this team. And Raymond is pushing 90-point pace. Larkin is around a point a game pretty consistently at this point. You mentioned DeBrincat is having a huge bounce back year offensively from what he did a year ago. Patrick Kane hopefully will be back and healthy. There is a kryptonite for this team, and it is the consistent depth scoring is not there for the Wings, and the blue line, for lack of a better term, blows. I mean, it's Mo Seider, Simon Edvinsson, and then who knows what. Aljo is a rookie. Johansson, he's been really solid, and I he's been playing with Edvinsson. They played a lot together last year when they were both in Grand Rapids, but that's a really young second pair. The third pair has been an atrocity. Ben Sherrod is on your top pair next to Moritz Seider. So they do lack, they don't lack bodies, but they lack depth. You know what I mean? Like, it's they got plenty of defensemen. They started the year with 8 on the roster, but like there is legitimate questions about the production that they will get from outside of their top pair and their top 6 offensively as well. So that's a big thing for people that go up against the Wings for sure.
And it'll be interesting to see the shift from one game to the next, because we do have a home and home, as many are probably finding out. I think this just kind of goes with the NHL schedule this year. I'm not a huge fan of some of the things that they've done. And like if you're going to do a home and home, if you have it within a couple of days, that's one thing. But I keep going back to a home and home the Wild had against the Devils, where they played on a Saturday and then they played on like a Thursday. It's like, awesome. what are we doing here? Like we don't need to do that.
We have we were talking before we hit record, the Wings go from the Four Nations break, which is 2 weeks long of not playing, and then the Wings have 3 games in 4 days immediately coming out of the break. They have the home and home, an off day Monday, and then a game on Tuesday.
I just want to talk to the scheduling office. Right. I just want to talk.
Just want to talk to them. I just want to talk to them.
Just want to talk to them. Well, we'll see how these games play out. Of course, all eyes will be on USA and Canada in the finale of the Four Nations face-off. So go Dylan Larkin, go Matt Boldy, go Brock Faber, and the rest of Team USA. And then we'll see what happens between the Wild and the Red Wings when the season resumes on Saturday. that will do it for our episode here today. So again, appreciate you taking the time to watch both Locked On Wild and Locked On Red Wings here today. Make sure to subscribe on either YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms, whether you're listening on your phone, in your car, on your laptop, or just watching on your TV. We thank you making both shows part of your daily routine. And you can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.